People at Marvel. Asking Spider-Man at the beginning. Chapter 21. Is it solved? Stark and Peter Parker quickly rushed to the window, trying to find Anthony, who had been smashed by his shield. But he did not fall in the building at all, but broke the window on the next floor in the process of falling and jumped in. Be careful. When the effect of smoke and tear gas grenades was over, Nick Fury coughed and stood up. Only a warning, but nothing else. It's okay, it's a trifle, I have to let him know that physical skills have limits after all, and technology doesn't. Stark said this indifferently, and then ordered towards the air, Jarvis, activate the backup plan. Understand, sir, the backup scheme is being activated. Jarvis responded. At this moment, Anthony, who was running around on the next floor, looking for an opportunity to fight Steve again, suddenly heard a mechanical sound. He didn't know what the mechanical sound was, until he turned around and saw a steel monster more than 2 meters tall behind him. What the hell? Anthony raised an eyebrow in puzzlement. There was no answer. In the next second, Anthony was directly held by the neck of the steel monster, followed it to break through the roof, and flew to the top again. Awesome, anti-Hulk armor, although I don't know why this thing is called anti-Hulk, but he is powerful. Stark looked at Anthony, who was caught, and said with a smug look. This anti-Hulk armor is exactly the benefit that Nick Fury gave when he came to him to try to get him to join the Avengers. Why it's called anti-Hulk armor, Stark doesn't know. Anyway, this thing is very good after it is built. It's not fair, if it weren't for this thing, I would definitely be able to beat you to the ground. Anthony struggled to shout. His idea was originally to raid S.H.I.E.L.D., but suddenly learned that Nick Fury was not in S.H.I.E.L.D. at all, so he had the idea of raiding Stark Industries. But unexpectedly, there is something more powerful here, and the defense level is not lower than S.H.I.E.L.D. No, it's fair, it's already a good thing to be able to subdue you without dying, you just hit us by surprise, wouldn't you really think you could beat the three of us? Steve said quietly. That's right, what about you can use a shield? The captain reacts and counterforces you and smashes you out, this is proof. Peter Parker echoed. Hearing the words of the two, Anthony fell silent. As Steve and Parker say, his Anthony's power is imitation, that is, taking the opponent by surprise when meeting and overwhelming the opponent in the way he does. This trick works well, but if it doesn't work and you can't hit the hit, the odds drop to 30%. The reason why Anthony did not run away was because he still wanted to hide in the mansion for a while and find an opportunity to take Nick Fury away. Game over, Ma Jal Fak. Nick Fury walked up to Anthony and said to him, thank you for throwing yourself into the net, now your end is to go to jail with Pierce. No, the game isn't over yet. Anthony said such a sentence inexplicably, and then his body suddenly became illusory until it disappeared completely. Solid projection. Nick Fury immediately knew what was going on. However, it was too late, and when he found Anthony's real location, his neck was grabbed by Anthony, who suddenly came out of the shadows, and then the whole person was driven up and rushed towards the flying machine outside the building. Don't let him take Nick Fury. Stark shouted and shot quickly, but a laser shot did not hit the Mercedes Anthony. Until Nick Fury was about to be taken to the flying machine, a hammer wrapped in lightning suddenly flew out, hit Anthony's back, and directly drove it out, not knowing where it went. And Nick Fury was lucky to land on the ground and was not taken to the aircraft. The game is still over. Steve kept throwing and said nonchalantly. This guy is not very powerful, but every time we meet, I can give you an unexpected surprise. Nick Fury breathed a sigh of relief, remembering that he was almost taken away by Anthony just now, but there was not much fear and happiness. Nick Fury is the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. after all, and if Anthony really succeeds in taking him away, it will actually be a 5-5 point showdown. Because Nick Fury will find a way to turn defeat into victory. But it's good that Steve can knock Anthony straight away. The hammer is quite powerful, and that does not die and sheds his skin. Stark nodded in admiration, and then pointed to the flying machine outside. Help me get this thing in first. This seems to be an automatic flying machine, and the technical content is not low. Steve and Parker then assist Stark in pulling the automatic aerial machine outside into the building with spider silk. This automatic aircraft is even if Anthony blew up the exterior of the Stark building, giving Stark himself compensation. Anthony's whereabouts are unknown, and the mission against him can be temporarily stopped. Natasha was directly transferred back and joined the Avengers along with Hawkeye. 2 days later. Where are these two people so powerful? I don't know why I am in a hurry to bring them into the gang, that Natasha was forced by the imitation master to report to you on a pay phone. In the corridor inside S.H.I.E.L.D., Stark spoke to Nick Fury, who was walking in front of several people. Peter Parker and Steve did little to Hawkeye and Natasha's addition, while Stark was adamantly opposed. He believes that a team must be composed of elites, and in any case cannot be arbitrarily recharged. One shoots bows and arrows, plus one who engages in espionage, is of little use. Anthony is not very powerful, but he can always surprise. The four of us are still put together by him, Natasha alone, or in the case of betrayal, it is already surprising to me that he can save his life. Nick Fury was unmoved, and gave his reasons with an expressionless face. That's what you said, but I don't think it's okay. Stark still doesn't give up. He has been persuading Nick Fury not to let Natasha join, not only for the sake of the alliance, but also because this Natasha once spied on him at Stark Industries. If such a person also joined the Avengers, Stark would not feel good about it. While speaking, the group entered the conference room, where Hawkeye and Natasha had been waiting for a long time. Hello. When the two sides met, Natasha greeted everyone very friendly. Hello. Stark, who had been persuading Nick Fury just now, was now staring at Natasha intently, shaking hands honestly without the slightest objection. It seems that someone's attitude has taken a 180-degree turn. Nick Fury glanced at Stark beside him, and said with some yin and yang strangeness. All I can say is that things are impermanent, at least we are allies now, so why should I be worried about the fact that she used to spy on me in the past? The Avengers are a superheroic organization that can be joined by anyone with the ability and righteousness. Stark said solemnly. Well said. Although Nick Fury felt that Stark was mostly looking for a step for himself, he couldn't help but approve of Stark's words. That's a good statement. Natasha had spied on Stark, and if Stark had been worried about it because of this, even if there was no way to prevent Natasha from joining the Avengers, he would find a way to trip up in the future. Now that Stark wants to open, that's fine. It's an eventful time, there are many people in great power, and although I don't have any superpowers or advanced technology, I have experience in intelligence work, and I can provide some help. Natasha said with a smile, then walked over to the computer and projected some relevant information onto the big screen. The eyes of everyone present also focused on the screen. It was an aerial shot of a drone, and below it was a group of children camping. Natasha, you seem to have misplaced the picture. Stark touched his head a little embarrassed, and made a reminder. No, this is a video shot by a civilian drone to record camping, and an unexpected situation was accidentally discovered later. Natasha zoomed in. Then the camp children suddenly raised their heads and looked up at the sky, and then scattered to the shouts of their parents. More than 10 seconds later, an object wrapped in lightning fell from the sky, smashing a large pit with a radius of more than 10 meters on the ground, surrounded by smoke. After a few more seconds, the smoke cleared and a hammer was revealed. Captain Peter Parker looked at Steve, wondering if he had been negligent in throwing the hammer out without taking it back, which led to a scene in the picture. It's not me. After beating the imitation master out before, the hammer came back on its own, and I can guarantee that it definitely didn't fly out and smash people. Steve defended. How do you know absolutely nothing? What if while you were sleeping, the hammer flew out on its own and smashed the ground out of a pit? Stark reasoned, then remembered something, and added, Captain, you don't have a habit of sleepwalking, do you? The previous reasoning is quite reasonable. After all, the research on the hammer is not deep now, and who knows if it will be self-aware. But what follows is pure skepticism. Steve didn't even bother to respond, glanced at Stark, and then continued to look at the screen. So, there are two hammers, one in Captain Steve's hand, and another one on this screen. Nick Fury reasoned quietly. And since the new Mjolnir has appeared, it means that everything is developing in the direction of that multiple-choice question. So as we did in the multiple-choice question, Thor was exiled and his hammer fell on Earth. Peter Parker reasoned. Hearing this, everyone else nodded in approval, feeling that 9 times out of 10, this was the case. Thor, the god of thunder, and Mjolnir, should not have been separated, and now that the hammer has appeared, Thor does not know where, but it is estimated that it is not far away. In any case, since the hammer is here, then Thor will inevitably try to get his hands on it. We just need to wait and see if this guy is good or bad. After a short thought, Nick Fury gave the order. 2 days later. Late at night. Just near the drop point of Mjolnir, 2 sneaky figures wearing hoods gradually approached the drop point, looking around. At this time, 2 days have passed, and scientists have been sent by S.H.I.E.L.D. to study the data on Mjolnir. But strangely, this time the study also seems to be drunk, without any security measures, as if not afraid of anyone interested in this mysterious alien thing. This also creates opportunities for Saul. Finally found it. Thor took off his hood, looked in the direction of the hammer, and sighed. In the past 2 days, he suddenly came to this exotic world, met a woman named Jane Foster, and gradually became familiar with life here with his help. But Thor didn't want to survive here at all. He knew that his brother Loki must have the idea of the throne, and he had to regain his strength and return to Asgard as quickly as possible. Thor, I'll help you stare. Jane pointed to her eyes, then to the hammer, signaling Thor to hurry over and pick it up. Although there are no security personnel here, after all, it is not a place to stay for a long time, and if someone runs out to relieve themselves, they can find these 2 uninvited guests. Thanks. Thor thanked him, then quickly ran to Mjolnir and put his hand on it with excitement. After taking a deep breath, he began to exert himself. But the hammer didn't move, as if Thor had never picked up Mjolnir. What's going on? Thor couldn't believe that he hadn't picked it up, so he continued to push hard and keep trying, but no matter what, he just couldn't pull the hammer up. After some useless effort, Thor realized that the hammer no longer recognized himself as a master. Unfortunately, at this time, there was heavy rain in the sky, which poured a thorough chill on Thor, and looking at the hammer in the dirt, it was even more infinitely sad. Why can't you pick it up? A man's voice came from behind him, and then an umbrella was extended to Thor. This sudden appearance startled Thor and took a few steps back, looking ahead in surprise. Not just one, but several. And these people were all in strange costumes, some in armor, some in combat uniforms, and not far away there was a man with a bow and arrow aimed at him. And the most striking thing is still the blue costume, holding a shield in one hand and holding it in the other. Mjolnir. Thor's pupils dilated suddenly, and he glanced at the hammer on the ground, and then at the one in Steve's hand, and his brain was almost down. At this time, he did not expect that he could find a replica of the hammer. That's weird. Mjolnir is absolutely no second artifact in the world. Why can this blue-clad weirdo have one? And why can he lift it? It's a long story, brother. Steve threw the hammer a little helplessly, not knowing how to explain this. What is on the ground is fake, what is in your hand is real. You deliberately created such a thing to fool me. Thor deduced a completely irrelevant result, immediately became hostile, and rushed towards Steve. Everyone knew that this was Thor, the god of thunder, and they were all ready to fight it, so the moment Thor rushed over, Steve did not dare to be careless and directly summoned lightning. Bang! The sky roared, and a heavenly thunder descended, slashing fiercely on the body of the thunder god Thor. Stark then rushed forward, ready to bombard with his laser. But unlike what others expected, after being hit by lightning, Thor did not fight back or use divine power at all, but directly weakened his legs, knelt on the ground, and spewed a black smoke from his mouth, unconscious. Thor. Jane in the shadows rushed out and threw herself at Thor to check on him. But Thor's chest was heaving from breathing, and he wasn't dead. This is Thor. A powerless Thor who will be slashed by lightning. Steve pointed at Thor, looking puzzled and suspicious. It's Thor. Nick Fury stared at Thor lying on the ground, and said indifferently, if it weren't for Thor, you would have beaten people into char when you split that just now. Hearing this, the other people who were still skeptical immediately nodded along, feeling that it really made sense. Thor in front of him should have lost his divine power, but because he is the god of Thor, he still has a certain resistance to thunder and lightning. Otherwise, Steve summoned thunder and lightning just now, and really split Thor directly into ashes. So what now? Peter Parker asked. Okay, set up a medical tent here, wait for Thor to wake up, explain everything to him, and see what is going on. After Nick Fury finished his order, he turned around and went to rest. Others sent Thor to the researchers to take care of them in charge of the medical care. The arrival of Thor was so unexpected and very boring. Originally, Stark also thought that the Avengers would have a big war with Thor, but he didn't think about it, and Steve solved it with a thunderbolt. Next, when Thor woke up from his hospital bed, it was noon the next day. He glanced at Jane, who was lying on her stomach next to the hospital bed, trimmed her hair, and then carefully stood up and walked out of the tent. Not unlike yesterday, researchers are still studying the hammer, and the environment here hasn't changed in any way because of Thor's arrival. You're awake. Steve stepped forward and handed Thor a bottle of water. The latter took a big mouthful, and then pointed to the hammer in Steve's hand and said, I don't know who you are, but I think you should return the property to the original owner. This hammer is originally mine. This one in my hand is not, that is. Steve pointed to Mjolnir, surrounded by researchers. No, 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 although I'm not an earthling, don't try to fool me, the one in your hand can summon thunder and lightning, and the one over there is fake. Saul said. Hearing this, Steve originally wanted to tell Thor that this was a replica in his hand, but he felt that Thor was in his current state and could not listen to anything, so he didn't bother to speak. He directly placed the shield of his other hand on his back, and then used his free hand towards the hammer on the ground. There was a buzzing sound, and the hammer, which had been firmly fixed to the ground, suddenly flew up and landed in Steve's hand. No. No, no, no. This can't be. Thor shook his head in disbelief. Probably. Steve helplessly spread out his hand, and then the two hammers he held in both hands swung at the center of the clearing in front of him at the same time. Bang! Thunder sounded, and two thunderbolts fell from the sky, blasting out two large craters on the ground. How could it be? It's all real Mjolnir. This. Thor was so shocked that he was incoherent. He held his head in his hands in disbelief, and asked as he stepped back, It's so strange, what is going on your Earth? Quote. Why do you have Mjolnir? Why were you waiting there when I went looking for the hammer? Do you have the ability to foresee the future? Why did I feel like I was at your mercy from beginning to end? Several questions were thrown out in a row, representing that Thor really doubted God now. All I can say is, it's a long story. Steve didn't know how to explain it to Thor. This hammer is a reward for the magic multiple choice question, and the foreknowledge of Thor's existence is also something analyzed in the multiple choice question. But how to tell Thor these things? In the end, Steve decided to settle Thor down first, let him tell him what trouble he was in, and then help him solve it. If you can also win over this Thor and let him join the alliance. There was no way, and Thor could only agree. Half an hour later. Nick Fury learns everything about him from Thor, including his exile from Odin, and now he has no divine powers and cannot hold a hammer. This is exactly the same as the correct answer to the multiple choice question. I guess if you were exiled, the hammer won't recognize you, but don't worry, we'll find a way to help you regain the hammer's approval. Nick Fury assured. Thank you. Thor thanked him, and then his face became heavy, and he said, It's just that I don't have divine power, and I can't hold Mjolnir at all. It's okay, I listened to your description, you have always relied on this hammer, so you should be more of a hammer god than a thunder god, help you get the hammer, your divine power will naturally recover. Stark said with a smile. Hammer god. Thor was a little speechless, but on second thought, Stark had a point. He has always relied heavily on Mjolnir, and the power of his own body has not been used much. So, you can stay with S.H.I.E.L.D. for the time being, you. Nick Fury arranged for Thor, but before he could finish speaking, the voice of the communicator interrupted him. Director, the energy radar has detected the appearance of an energy body in the building, and the energy index of the target is still rising rapidly. An eager voice from the researcher came out of the communicator. Energy. What's the situation? Nick Fury raised his eyebrows, wondering what kind of super criminal he had provoked again. It's my brother. Thor opened his mouth to say these 4 words, and then, his eyes deepened, and he muttered, In this case, he has already succeeded, then he will definitely not miss the opportunity to get rid of me. Nick Fury was wondering what Thor had to say when a burst of light appeared in the corner of the conference room, then turned into a pillar of light, and the last humanoid metal object appeared in front of everyone. The atmosphere seemed to freeze. Everyone in the conference room looked at the metal monster that suddenly appeared, looking at it suspiciously. Since this kind of humanoid thing is generally an intellectual life, everyone's first reaction is that this thing will at least explain the purpose of its coming and then negotiate. At this time, even Nick Fury, who knew all the confidential information, could not find anything wrong with humans in his mind, so he was not immediately vigilant. But the destroyer is not an intellectual life, and its purpose in coming to Earth is to kill Thor, the god of thunder, and eliminate all the guys in the way. Don't be stunned. Thor, who was stunned just now, was the first to react. He knew the fear of the destroyer, so he shouted for everyone to dodge. However, for a big killer like the destroyer, less than 3 seconds of stunned was completely enough for him to attack. Buzz. A buzzing sound sounded, the head of the destroyer gradually scattered, an energy mass appeared on the face, and then gathered the energy and shot towards Nick Fury and the others. Be careful. Thor wanted to step forward to help block it, but thinking that he was no longer Thor and could not control the hammer, he couldn't help but hesitate. At this time, Thor had no divine power, and he knew that he could not stand in front of the destroyer like a god, otherwise the end would definitely be penetrated by that beam. This is the survival instinct of living things. Just as Thor hesitated, Captain Steve also reflected, quickly blocking in front of Nick Fury, and using the vibranium shield to deliver the next blow. The destroyer's beam lasted a long time, hitting straight on the shield, and the huge impact directly slid Steve back. Then it was Stark and Peter Parker who quickly came to the rescue, supporting the shield with Steve, which blocked the attack of the destroyer. And that beam of light, which was also continuously reflected by the vibranium shield, penetrated the shield building and rushed straight towards the sky. The building of shield was directly penetrated. Hold it back for me. Steve roared, adjusted all his strength to his left arm, and while supporting his shield with one hand, he picked up Mjolnir and swung it towards the destroyer. A bolt of thunder flashed from the ground and rushed past, directly knocking the destroyer who was shooting beams. But this is Asgard's super weapon of destruction, the existence of a humanoid strategic weapon, and it is not so easy to deal with at all. Even after being hit by a hammer, the destroyer did not stop the beam of light, but only deflected direction, like a knife directly cutting the shield building in half. If it weren't for the steel reinforcement of this building, I'm afraid that just this sweep would have shattered in half. At this moment, Thor is behind Steve, supporting the shield with Stark and them. But after he found that his strength was very weak and useless, he simply picked up a solid steel frame that fell on the ground, rushed towards the destroyer, and hit it the head. Bang! A sound of metal clashing sounded, and the head of the destroyer was sparked, but the head did not move, and the solid steel pipe was immediately broken. This face made Solon stunned. He knew that the destroyer was powerful. After all, this was Asgard's weapon, and it was not a big secret. But I just didn't expect it to be so powerful that at this time, it was a mortal Saul. Even if he tried his best to smash the solid steel frame, he could not make the destroyer tremble in the slightest. Next second, with a straight punch that couldn't be seen clearly, the destroyer directly knocked Thor backwards and flew out, slamming into the wall of the conference room. Protect Thor. Nick Fury ordered loudly. At the same time, the destroyer has walked towards Thor step by step. All come. Peter Parker approached from the ceiling and quickly ejected a large amount of spider silk, enveloping the destroyer's entire body. But those genetically enhanced and extremely viscous spider silk are like spider webs in reality, vulnerable. The destroyer was entangled and only pulled lightly, and then completely tore it off. But even so, it created opportunities for the next offensive. Steve quickly approached from behind, throwing his shield first, then grabbing two Mjolnir and throwing them sharply. Of the two hammers, one is copied and the other is Sol's. Because Steve can use it, Thor's hammer is temporarily carried on him, and he can use both hammers at the same time if he wishes. Bang! The shield hit the destroyer's body and was easily bounced off, leaving not a single scratch behind. And when the two thrown hammers were about to hit the destroyer who was suddenly walking towards Thor changed his body surface for a while, and suddenly changed from facing forward to facing backward. Mjolnir's weight is not light, even the destroyer is impossible to catch, so it does not pick up at all, but dodges the two hammers in a strange state. It's really difficult. Steve muttered, reached out and pulled back the two hammers that flew out, and then directly took them and hit the destroyer. Things have developed to this stage, the destroyer is already close to Thor, and there is no more than 10 meters between the two. The surface of the destroyer's body turned, suddenly changed to a forward-facing direction, knocked Thor out, and then turned backward in the blink of an eye, kicking Steve back in the pounce. In this way, no one can take the slightest advantage from the destroyer. Thor, who is the main target of the destroyer, also failed to protect it, and his posture had been beaten by the destroyer from the conference room and smashed through the wall and into the official processing area. The bones of his legs were twisted, and it could be seen that it had been broken. Now there are still combat capabilities, except for Stark, who suddenly disappeared. There is Peter Parker left. He wandered over the ceiling, ready to attack the destroyer from directly above. But the destroyer directly grabbed the spider silk he spewed out, and then slammed Peter Parker to the ground, and then grabbed it, slowly using his hand force. Ahem, ahem, ahem. Peter Parker struggled violently, slapped the destroyer's arm hard, but to no avail. He was pinched by the neck, he could hear the crunch of bones, and the suffocation became stronger and stronger. Just as Peter Parker was about to be choked off by the neck, the destroyer suddenly threw him away and turned around. Stark, who had just found an opportunity to sneak out, returned. At this time, he was wearing anti-Hulk armor, which was much taller than the destroyer, and his physique was stronger. However, this was far from a formidable enemy in the eyes of the destroyer, so he directly threw a punch and hit the abdomen of the anti-Hulk armor hard. When the punch that was enough to knock Steve out hit the anti-Hulk armor accurately, it failed to knock the behemoth back, let alone knock it incapacitated. The anti-Hulk armor controlled by Stark stood motionless, leaving not even a single mark in the location hit by the destroyer. Mithril Silver. Nick Fury pronounced those two words. In order to quickly win Stark to join the Avengers, he sincerely gave him the anti-Hulk armor blueprint, and also gave him mithril with him. And these mithril direct forging applications, used to protect the most important part of the anti-Hulk armor. Unfortunately there is not much mithril silver, not enough to completely wrap the anti-Hulk armor. When faced with the destroyer, these mithril become indestructible armor. You're done fighting, it's my turn. Stark raised his fist, and suddenly a piece of mithril on his body flowed and wrapped around the anti-Hulk armored fist. Then, the arm of the anti-Hulk armor ejected flames, driving a huge counterforce, and hit the destroyer's head fiercely. Bang! With a loud bang, the head of the destroyer spewed out a large number of sparks, and it was originally indestructible like Mount Tai, and the next second it was directly knocked out of the distance, drawing several circles in the air, and fell heavily on the ground. What's going on? Can mithril still flow? Nick Fury, who was watching the battle, knew that bullets were useless, so he didn't mix with the battle to cause confusion for others. When he saw Stark's anti-Hulk armor, the mithril flowing around his fist, he was surprised. I didn't forge the shell with mithril or the armor, I made it into a nanorobot. Stark's voice came out of the armor. No wonder. Nick Fury wiped the sweat from his forehead, thinking to himself that Stark was a genius. With mithril not forging shells, but used to make nanobots, when a part of the armor is about to be attacked, these nanorobots will automatically gather and carry the attack. And when it is necessary to attack, the nanorobot will also converge on the fist as a powerful mithril fist. This kind of operation makes dwarves call them experts when they see it. With one hit, Stark wants to get close to the destroyer and keep attacking until he breaks the guy to pieces. But the destroyer did not stand up, but from lying on his stomach, he suddenly became lying on his back, the metal structure of his face opened, and a cloud of energy gathered together. Finally, it shot towards Stark. Such an attack did not break Steve's shield just now, so Stark did not think it would break his mithril either. However, the violent energy shock weakened the speed of the anti-Hulk armor, making it unable to advance quickly and had to move slowly. At this time, the destroyer stood up while keeping the jet, increasing the energy of the beam with every millisecond. Until 5 seconds later, the heat wave in the conference room rolled, and Nick Fury, who was more than 10 meters away, could be affected by the heat of the beam, and his skin was hot and sweaty. After a few more seconds, Stark was looking for an opportunity to get out, but found that the AI alerted him that the nanorobot had gone down. The information showing the situation of nanorobots also shows that under these high energy rays of hundreds of thousands of degrees, nanorobots are gradually melting. The nanorobots made of mithril gradually melted, so that the heat could not be absorbed by this magical metal, but spread throughout the anti-Hulk armor. This extreme heat caused Stark inside to sweat, and the armored system stopped running due to overheating. No, 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 no. Not now. Stark shook his head repeatedly, trying to save the situation, but the system was still down. The disadvantage of mithril is the same as that of all metals, that is, if it reaches extremely high temperatures, it melts. The destroyer almost used all his strength to eject the beam, so that now after stopping the ejection, the energy mass has entered a dissipated state, and can no longer shoot energy in a short time. But it doesn't matter, the anti-Hulk armor has already been subdued. The destroyer walked directly to Saul, who was lying on the floor of the hall. No. Thor looked desperately at the approaching destroyer, and then crawled on the ground with all his strength. Come to me, Ma Jal Fak. Nick Fury pulls out his pistol and shoots at the destroyer just to draw his attention to himself. But the destroyer ignored him at all and kept walking towards Thor until a figure stood in his way. Thor raised his head to look at the person in front of him, and found that it was the woman with whom he had a good relationship after coming to Earth, Jane Foster. Stop going any further, monster. Jane held a steel pipe, and although she trembled with fear and trembled in fear, she did not flee in the face of the destroyer. You leave. Thor yelled, crawling towards Jane, pushing her legs hard, trying to get the weak Earth woman to leave. But Jane did not run away and still stood in front of the destroyer. Just as Thor was brought to S.H.I.E.L.D. and was very uneasy, Jane Foster accompanied him to S.H.I.E.L.D. Now Jane did not abandon Thor and fled for her life alone. Buzz. The destroyer looked at the Earthling suspiciously, and then did not bypass her, but reached out and directly grabbed Jane's head and picked her up. Jane struggled, tapping the destroyer's body with a steel pipe, but to no avail. Gradually, the destroyer's hand was strengthened, and Jane's grabbed head immediately became violently painful, and there was a feeling of almost shattering. Nope. You monster. Let her go. Thor crawled to the feet of the destroyer and tapped at the ankle. But at this time, Thor's legs were broken, and even walking was a problem, let alone stopping the destroyer's behavior. Nick Fury, who was useless in shooting, simply ran over, constantly looking for something to knock on the destroyer's body, but it was also useless. Until Jane's head was bleeding under the pressure, although not dead but dying, Thor roared, and his body was gradually entangled with wandering thunder and lightning. What's the situation? Nick Fury, who was shooting at the destroyer, was surprised to see this scene. Thor is no longer Thor, but thunder and lightning still appear on him, which may be a sign that his strength is recovering. A few seconds later, Thor suddenly got up from the ground, his whole body wrapped in thunder and lightning, hugged the destroyer's waist, and rushed straight out of S.H.I.E.L.D. like a bolt of lightning. Die. Coming to the clearing outside, Thor rode on the body of the destroyer, stretched his right hand into the sky, and after a thunderbolt fell from the sky and rapped his fist, Thor punched him fiercely. At this time, the destroyer had just stretched out his hand to block, but the furious Thor fully regained his strength, and this punch directly broke his arm. Thor. Steve shouted Thor's name, struggled to get up from the ground, and threw the two Mjolnir towards Thor. The latter took it directly, raised it high, and slammed it down on the head of the destroyer. Bang! The roar of thunder and lightning sounded, and when the two Mjolnir collided with the head of the destroyer, a thunder shock wave burst out in an instant and spread out to the surroundings, directly overturning everything around. And the destroyer was directly blasted by this heavy blow, destroyed on the spot, and could no longer pose any threat. After finally defeating the destroyer, Thor stood up breathlessly and glanced back at the others. They were all relieved and happy that Thor could regain his power. Loki. Thor walked to the conference room, threw a hammer to Steve, and then looked at Nick Fury and said, Director S.H.I.E.L.D., this destroyer was definitely sent by Loki, which proves that Asgard has fallen into the hands of this guy. Asgard. Nick Fury frowned at the name, pondering deeply. Asgard. In Norse mythology, it is the abode of the gods and should be the hometown of the thunder god Thor. And since Asgard has fallen into Loki's hands, ruled by him, and even been able to put the destroyer on Earth to hunt down Thor, it proves that Asgard has fallen. I need your help. Thor stretched out his hand towards Nick Fury and said squarely, help me retake Asgard, and I can agree to your conditions. Hearing this, Nick Fury closed his eyes and thought for a while, shook hands with Thor, and said, in fact, I also need your help, and I hope you can join the Avengers. Hearing This request, Thor agreed without hesitation. He knows that the destroyer was released by his brother to hunt him down, which means that Asgard's side can no longer give him any help, and has been controlled by Loki. If he wants to crush Loki's plot, he must let the Earthlings assist him. And Nick Fury is not completely without other ideas. He had just seen Thor kill the destroyer in 3 strokes and 5 by 2, and knew the power of this Thor in its heyday, and such a person could also help Earth win the help of Asgard. Then after the big prophecy of the future in the multiple-choice question, that is, the invasion of the Chitauri people, perhaps you can solve the problem in the bud without much effort and without too much loss. Welcome to the board, Thor. Steve held out his hand towards Thor. Thank you for your help, Captain. Not only does the hammer recognize you, but I also recognize you. Thor shook Steve's hand amicably. At this time, Thor felt a little sympathetic to Steve, an Earthling. After all, there is only one Mjolnir, but a second one was found on Earth, and this Steve can also use 2 Mjolnir, and is recognized by the hammer like he saw. Saul, who grew up in Asgard and knew the theory of the multiverse, suddenly thought that Steve would be himself in another world, but came to Earth for other reasons. Sensing Thor's doubts, Steve said, "Haven't you always been curious about why I got it, and used the hammer? Although I don't know how I got the hammer approval, I can let you know how I got Mjolnir." That's right, but we need to wait for a moment. Nick Fury interjected. Timing. Thor raised his eyebrows, not quite understanding what these 2 people meant. If there is really something that he can know, then just say no, why wait for what time? Night. After the Avengers had dinner, they all gathered in Stark Industries. It's not that they don't want to go to S.H.I.E.L.D., it's just that S.H.I.E.L.D. has just been ravaged by the destroyer and urgently needs to be repaired, at least for a week. On the top floor of Stark Industries, the group sat on sofas and chairs, or drank drinks or watched TV. Obviously they had gathered, but nothing seemed to happen. Don't you want to say something? Saul Fox looked at those people suspiciously, with a very puzzled expression on his face. You'll know then, Steve said indifferently. After half an hour of waiting, a blurry shadow gradually appeared in front of everyone's eyes, followed by a line of words. Appeared. It's coming. Wait, what is it? Thor waved his arm, trying to disperse the handwriting in front of him, but found that he couldn't disperse it at all, so he rubbed his eyes vigorously, but those words just wouldn't dissipate, which was very strange. Select start. In the invasion war of the Chitauri people, what means did Loki the god of Thor help the Chitauri people come to Earth? A. His original divine power. B. Thanos uses space gems. C. Mind controls Jane Foster's father and lets him work as a researcher to assist Loki in obtaining and using the cosmic cube. D. Loki acquires the power of Heimdall and uses the Rainbow Bridge to help the Chitauri come to Earth. Choose correctly. Reward, Infinity Gauntlet. Selection failed. 9 Realms explosion. Still about the Chitauri people, it can be seen that this is definitely not a fuel-efficient lamp. Seeing this multiple-choice question, Nick Fury said with some helplessness. He now felt more and more that it was the right thing to do with the Avengers earlier, and to prepare with them earlier. Otherwise, it will definitely be caught off guard in the future. Thor, you should understand by now where the hammer came from. It was from this multiple-choice question. The last time we got a multiple-choice question about you right, and then we got Mjolnir and also knew your details. Steve explained to Thor. No wonder you were waiting for me to take the hammer, it turned out to be the information you knew from this. Thor suddenly realized, staring at the multiple-choice question in front of him with burning eyes, and said in a deep voice, this time we must choose the right one no matter what. The 9 realms are Asgard, as well as Earth, plus other independent worlds, and I understand it in one word, and that is the universe. After saying 2 words, Thor glanced at the others with solemn eyes, and added, choose the wrong one, and we will all be finished. Hearing this explanation, the others immediately realized the seriousness of the matter, and no one dared to make suggestions at will, because everyone was afraid that their choice would be wrong, which would eventually lead to the explosion of the 9 realms. Without a doubt, this is a crucial choice, many times more important than every previous one. The previous Lizardman Dr. Connors, if he chose the wrong one, it was nothing more than a loss of life, and for the able-bodied superheroes, this decade was just a decade for them to spend in a hospital bed, and there was no big problem. But now the price of this multiple choice question error is the destruction of the 9 realms. Can I speak? At this time, even Stark was asking for the opinions of others before speaking, trying his best to avoid his own words leading to the destruction of the 9 realms. Please say. Nick Fury nodded. I think we have to be cautious and let Thor tell us what kind of guy Loki is, what is he evil, and what his identity background is. Stark turned towards Thor and said in a deep voice. Loki. Recalling his troublesome elf brother, Thor frowned, and said helplessly, this guy is my younger brother. It's hard to say whether he is righteous or evil, it's better to say that he is self-interested. Loki also showed up when I met Jane before, and he told me that my father Odin was mad at me, but then I didn't think that was the case. Then came the Destroyer, which I think Loki did, only his tricks can control Asgard, and I suspect he has a bigger conspiracy. From these words, everyone heard Loki's character and knew the current situation in Asgard. With this premise, these answers can be analyzed one by one. Thor, if you know Loki well, tell me if he has the ability to summon a large army of shapes to descend on Earth. Nick Fury asked. Loki is the god of fraud, his power is not very strong, it is okay to travel through space by himself, but it is delusional to summon an army. Thor answered truthfully. Listening to him say this, the others knew that A's answer must be impossible, so they directly eliminated it. Next is answer B. Who is Thanos? Nick Fury asked Thor again. Now Thor has become a mobile knowledge base, and this person from Asgard seems to be an omniscient existence in the eyes of the Earthlings. In fact, the Asgardian people are really very knowledgeable, and they have a very deep understanding of the nature of the world. But unfortunately, Nick Fury and they met Thor. I don't know, maybe it's an alien, or something. I didn't really like learning when I was a kid, you know. Thor said with some embarrassment. Hearing this, the rest of the people showed helpless expressions. I finally met a man from Asgard, or the legendary god of Thor, but this person didn't like to learn. This guy called Thanos has also appeared in multiple choice questions a few times before, and I think he seems to be a very powerful guy, but it has nothing to do with us for the time being, so this option is put on hold for the time being, and the next one is next. Nick Fury said. Option C. Control Jane Foster's father, let him as a researcher, to obtain the cosmic cube. Stark read the option through, then looked at Thor and asked, Jane Foster, the woman who stood up between you and the Destroyer, where is her father? Jane is studying aliens, I know this, and I helped her get back information, and her father I don't know much about, but he should also be a scientist. Thor said ambiguously. The amount of information he said was too little to confirm something, so Stark looked directly at Nick Fury when he didn't speak. As the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., if Nick Fury wants to check people, it is still very convenient. No need to check, Jane Foster's father. S.H.I.E.L.D. had plans to get her father to join S.H.I.E.L.D., and speaking of this, Nick Fury swallowed his saliva, and a look of horror appeared on his face, and it's to study the cosmic Rubik's Cube. That's right. So this is the right answer, right? Peter Parker excited. Not necessarily. The cosmic cube is an energy block. The energy contained in this thing is extremely high, but it has no teleportation function, at least Hydra has not been used. Steve said quietly. Hearing his words, Nick Fury nodded approvingly. At this stage, the cosmic cube is just a thing containing powerful energy, and I don't know what it does for the time being, but it is estimated that it will not be teleportation. Look at option D. Thor said. Heimdall is the one in charge of the Rainbow Bridge in Asgardry. He can use the Rainbow Bridge to teleport people to anywhere in the 9 realms, but he has to pass through the Rainbow Bridge, and the Zetarii I don't know where it is, anyway, it won't be in Asgard. Then don't think about it. Nick Fury removed option D. The current situation is that both option A and option D have been eliminated, leaving only the pending BC option. What exactly to choose between these two options is still a question. Otherwise, choose option B, space gems, it sounds like something that can be used to teleport. Stark suggested. Indeed. Nick Fury didn't deny it, but he thought about it and felt wrong. Why did Thanos use space gems to teleport the Chitauri to Earth? We don't have an intersection at all. I think it's better to choose C. After all, S.H.I.E.L.D. is indeed going to let Professor Jane join the research, and what is the use of the cosmic cube? No one knows, things can be used to teleport. Steve said. Listening to his words, everyone also felt that it made sense. There is no way. In the end, only a vote was carried out, and the stations that supported Selection B were together, and the stations that supported Selection C were together. In the end, the result of the vote was C. C has one more vote than B. Then circa. Nick Fury said. Congratulations on the correct choice, the reward has been distributed. B. Prompt appeared, and a strange glove with 5 grooves appeared in front of everyone. God, we are only one vote away from destroying the world. Peter Parker said fearfully. Before they could rejoice, the surrounding scenery suddenly changed rapidly, and then it became the cityscape of New York. At this time, there is a huge whirlpool in the sky, and at the top of the building, a device is supplying energy to the whirlpool. Next to the installation, the person standing was none other than Loki. Then, an alien warship emerged from the vortex and began to wreak havoc in New York City. This picture did not last long and disappeared. It's a prophecy, and we have to avoid that future. Nick Fury said. After a little thought, he came up with a strategy. We have to start first. Quote. I think Professor Jane doesn't seem to be controlled by Loki yet, so we can't do anything to them. Stark pointed out the crux of the matter. The current Professor Jane is still the original Professor Jane, which shows that everything is not yet in the multiple choice prediction is running. Maybe something else happened in between. Steve pinched his chin and analyzed. Hearing the words of the two, the others closed their eyes and thought for a while, going through the whole thing from beginning to end to see if there was anything missing. Chitauri. Tal pronounced the name, and then said suspiciously, Loki grew up in Asgard, and he couldn't have known any Chitauri, so I think something else must be going to happen in between. Quote. Loki is quite comfortable in Asgard, and he won't leave easily. Could it be that he had to run away from Asgard and send himself somewhere else to meet someone? Peter Parker murmured. As soon as he said this, Thor, Nick Fury and the others were stunned, and then looked at Peter Parker excitedly. What's wrong? Peter Parker was a little confused, not understanding why these people were staring at him so much. You're right, kid. Stark nodded in approval, then looked at Thor and asked, do you have any teleporters in Asgard, or are they alien? These may have been Loki's departure from Asgard, which led him to meet the Chitauri. Yes, the Rainbow Bridge is, but the Rainbow Bridge is directional teleportation, and in addition to that, there is the void under the Rainbow Bridge. I don't know what will happen if you fall underneath, but this is the way to get Loki out of Asgard. Turdao. So decided, now we will find a way to get to Asgard, and then beat Loki under the Rainbow Bridge as fast as we can, forcing him to leave Asgard and meet the Chitauri. Nick Fury made up his mind and repeated the order. Everyone else nodded, and there was no objection, all of them were eager to try. Although following the prophetic route of the multiple choice question, it is still necessary to let Loki know the Chitauri in the end, and then let him use trickery to lure the Chitauri and start a war. But this is the future predicted from multiple choice questions, and it is assured. Otherwise, let the situation develop, and it is not known what will become of it. Instead of that, it is better to take the initiative. Thor, I'll ask you next. Nick Fury looked at Thor and said. Don't worry. Thor nodded, then sent a message to Heimdall. This message is how Asgardians can connect with each other, no matter how far away, even if they are not on the same planet. Meanwhile, in Asgardry, Heimdall, the guardian of the Rainbow Bridge, has just had a confrontation with Loki, and the final confrontation fails, and Loki uses the ancient winter coffin to directly freeze Heimdall. You can't get my brother back now, Loki said as he looked at Heimdall contemptuously. At this time, standing here is not only Loki, but also the warriors of the two frost giants. At this time, Loki had gone to the giants and found Laufey, hoping to use his power to kill Odin and help him seize the throne of Asgard. But in fact, Loki has other plans, but now Laufey is kept in the dark. I win, Asgard must be mine. Loki muttered to himself and turned his head away, ready to leave. But not far away, he heard the sound of ice shattering behind him. Looking back, I saw that Heimdall, who was originally frozen by the ancient winter coffin, suddenly recovered and broke free from the ice. Loki cursed angrily, and then anticipated that Heimdall would definitely attack him, so he prepared a defensive posture. But Heimdall did not go to him, but suddenly turned around, ran to the Rainbow Bridge, and directly opened the Rainbow Bridge. Seeing this weird scene, even Loki, who has a very good brain, can't react to what is going on. The action of this rainbow bridge keeper is endless. He obviously had to cut himself with a sword just now, and since the ice can't trap him, he broke through the ice. Why didn't he attack himself, but to open the rainbow bridge? But Heimdall opened the rainbow bridge, and now Asgard needs to use the rainbow bridge to come back. Who else but Thor? Nope. Thinking of the answer, Loki wanted to go up and stop it. But he took a slow step, and after a flash of light, several figures appeared in front of Heimdall. At the head, it was Thor. But the people behind him made Loki a little puzzled. These people were not leaving Asgard and going to Earth to find Thor's 4 warriors. In particular, one of the strong men dressed in blue and white actually held a hammer exactly like Thor. This is even more confusing. Also confused were the 2 warriors of the Frost Giants. At this time, they didn't understand the situation, but just stared at everything in front of them with wide eyes. Game over, brother. Thor said indifferently, and he slowly moved forward. No, Thor, you listen to me, it was a complete accident. Luo basically followed the principle that a good man would not suffer an immediate loss, and immediately threw the ancient winter coffin on the ground, raising his hands to find an opportunity to escape. But Thor wouldn't give him a chance, but suddenly rushed forward. Beside him, Steve threw out the hammer, and this replica of Mjolnir was not weak, and flew directly towards Loki with thunder and lightning. Loki was agile and easily dodged the flying Mjolnir, but taking advantage of this effort, had already come to Loki, and he swung the hammer out, knocking Loki into the air. Before it fell, Peter Parker spewed spider silk to bind Loki. In the end, Loki finally fell, and Stark, who was wearing anti-Hulk armor, stepped forward, grabbed Loki's lower body, and threw him into the void below the Rainbow Bridge. This set of combos is very beautiful and very fast. From beginning to end, Loki did not react, and found himself thrown out and about to fall into the void below. Nope. Brother, save me. Loki yells at Thor, trying to awaken his brother's compassion and free him from his impending descent into the void. But Thor just stood on the rainbow bridge and said downward, "It's okay Loki, you won't die, you'll come back eventually." Loki, who fell into the void, didn't know why, watching himself getting farther and farther away from the rainbow bridge, wondering how his brother had become so fierce. But Thor is right, he won't die in the void. Are these 2 guys from your Asgard too? After solving Loki, Nick Fury looked at the Frost Giant warriors on both sides and asked. Obviously, no. Thor glanced at the 2 warriors, then suddenly threw out his hammer, knocked the 2 guys who were stunned from head to tail directly to lie down, and then led everyone to continue forward. He felt that things were still a little out of control. The presence of the warriors of the Frost Giants shows that Loki definitely ran to Jotunheim and made an agreement with Laufey, the king of the giants. And the content of this agreement is likely to kill Odin and help Loki ascend to the throne. But thinking of this, Thor felt that such a simple plan, his brother absolutely disdained. Loki must have a bigger calculation, such as coming to a Black Eat, killing Laufey, and then destroying Jotunheim, relying on this credit to ascend to the throne. But no matter what, Loki has already left Asgard anyway, and the next thing is to dispose of Laufey. Guys, we must deal with the Frost Giant King Laufey next. This guy is a bit powerful and may require some effort. Thor reminded humanity. It doesn't matter, anyway, we came with you, no matter what kind of enemy it is at that time, just like against Loki just now, just go up and beat him until he is incapacitated. Nick Fury said indifferently. He is not a warrior who follows glory, but the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., so his thinking is to solve the enemy with the greatest advantage, regardless of whether the means are bright or not. Steve, they can understand this, but for an Asgardian like Thor, it is a little too much. But the special affairs, Thor really didn't want to single out Laufey. While speaking, the group had already arrived at the sleeping room of the god King Odin. Thor kicked open the door directly and broke into the door with the rest of the Avengers. Odin, I'm going to let you see who killed you. Laufey was now holding Odin's eyes with his hands, trying to get him to watch him kill him. The hatred between the Frost Giants and Asgard has lasted for tens of thousands of years, and at this time, Laufey finally has the opportunity to kill this nemesis. How can he die peacefully in his sleep? But precisely because he did this, he lost time and never had a chance to kill Odin again. Take your hand off my father's eyes. Thor said coldly towards Laufey. Hearing his voice, Laufey turned his head to look at Thor, his eyes full of doubt, and wondered, Thor. Loki told me that you should fight the destroyer on Earth. When did you come back? Just now. Now that Loki has fallen into the void, you'll be next. Thor said, pointing at Laufey. Hearing this, Laufey glanced at Thor, then at the others, stood up and said, do you want to bully the less? It's not like the behavior of a fighter. You ran all the way to Asgard, ready to kill an old man in his sleep. Are you like a warrior? Thor said disdainfully. Hearing this, Laufey was speechless for a while, unable to refute it. In the end, Nick Fury was too lazy to listen to the nonsense, and directly stood up and said, no matter who you are, give you a chance to say your last words. Quote. I am the king of the frost giants, nothing can defeat me, I don't need a last word, and I. Before Laufey finished speaking, Nick Fury was too lazy to listen, and directly made an attack gesture. Then Peter Parker spewed out a large amount of spider silk to entangle Laufey. Thor and Steve simultaneously summoned lightning to slash at Laufey's body, and then Stark rushed forward, Mithril gathered in his hand, and punched Laufey backwards and flew out, smashing through more than a dozen walls in succession. When the dust from the rapid attack cleared, everyone saw that Laufey had fallen to the ground, dying. It's over. Thor put away Mjolnir and patted the dust off his body. That's why we have to form an alliance, because in this way our forces will be stronger together, otherwise I am afraid that the winning rate will drop a lot in the face of this giant king alone. Nick Fury said indifferently. Hearing his words, everyone nodded. Although this kind of thing is very unmartial arts, and it is still an old man like the giant Wang Laufey, it is good to do so sometimes. Is this god King Odin, who will sleep forever? Stark looked at Odin and asked. I guess so, but who knows, maybe my father will wake up under special circumstances. Thor said indifferently. At this time, he hoped that his father would wake up, but he was not very anxious, because he already had the ability to protect the people of Asgard. What he didn't know was that the reason why Odin didn't wake up at this time was because he was very puzzled. Thor's affairs on Earth, Odin has seen clearly. He does not know what the mysterious choice question is. It can contain future information, and even use the Infinity Gauntlet as a prize. This Infinity Gauntlet has one in the treasury of Asgard, but that's fake. Because of these strange things, Odin did not choose to wake up, but planned to continue to sleep for a while to see how things would go. After solving the frost giants, Thor did not stay in Asgard, but appointed some people to help stabilize the situation in Asgard, and he himself had more important matters. A week later. The top floor of Stark Industries. Natasha played back the search for information about Professor Jane. After reading it, everyone confirmed that he still did not behave strangely, so they all decided with a little skepticism. Loki hasn't controlled Professor Jane yet. Could it be that something went wrong with what we did, causing Loki not to know the Zeteri people, but died in the void? Peter Parker wondered. Hearing this, Thor's face became ugly. He did not rescue his brother at that time, because everyone had discussed that Loki would not die if he fell, but would leave Asgard and know the Zeteri. But now it seems that this prediction is a bit problematic. However, falling into the void is the only way for Loki to leave Asgard and go to an unknown space, and the Rainbow Bridge can't do it, so wait a little longer, and if nothing happens by then think of another way. Nick Fury said. Then there was another wait, until Jane Foster suddenly came to S.H.I.E.L.D. one day and said that his father had been very strange lately. After getting the news, Nick Fury immediately realized that it was Loki who was coming, so he also decided to take the next step. A day later. In the newly built base of S.H.I.E.L.D., Professor Khan is invited to participate in the second part of the Pegasus program. The so-called second part is to weaponize the energy of the cosmic cube and use it to create various advanced and sophisticated weapons. In the institute, Nick Fury walked in the front, and Professor Jane followed. The two gradually came to a weapons display stand, on which were placed two strangely shaped guns. Nick Fury picked one up and introduced, "This is a weapon captured in World War II, originally developed by Hydra, but now he is ours." After the introduction, Nick Fury pulled the trigger on the distant target. The weapon in his hand flashed with blue light, and an energy light was emitted, hitting the target in the distance. It was not a target, but scattered in the middle of the road, hitting more than 10 targets like a heavenly lady scattering flowers. Cool. Professor Gien nodded expressionlessly. From the surface, he did not feel that this weapon was advanced and cool at all. Even if it was the first time he had seen such a weapon. Discovering his reaction, Nick Fury raised his eyebrows and sensed that something was wrong. Professor Jane's intelligence, shield collected a lot, and Nick Fury also knew the character of this guy, the personality of an ordinary person. When he saw the weapon created using the energy of the cosmic Rubik's Cube, he would definitely not be shocked. However, Professor Jien's face was flat, as if the drunk did not mean to drink. Director Fury, I want to see where the cosmic cube is, can I? Professor Jien said suddenly. Of course, you can watch it at any time, because you're going to study this stuff next. Nick Fury did not hesitate and directly took Professor Jane to the storage of the cosmic cube. This reservoir is in a suitcase, and inside are several energy devices that lock the Rubik's Cube, which can prevent the Rubik's Cube from blowing the reservoir as much as possible. Seeing the cosmic Rubik's Cube, Professor Jane's face showed a look of surprise and excitement, and quickly said, Director Fury, if I'm not mistaken, this is the legendary cosmic Rubik's Cube, right? Of course, if we study it, it may mean that we will have endless energy, and of course, weapons are also important. Nick Fury replied. Hearing this, Professor Jane suddenly looked at the mirror on the side, and in the mirror, Loki's figure emerged. It's worth investigating. The grizzled Loki said with a smile. But no one could see him at this point, and neither could Nick Fury. Immediately, Professor Jane looked at Nick Fury and said with a smile, this is worth investigating. Quote. A moment later. So he's really controlled by Loki. On the second floor of S.H.I.E.L.D., Thor said as he looked at the repeated monitor footage. At this time, Loki could not have imagined that his mysterious smile that showed his character directly exposed him under the monitor. The figure that emerged from him in the mirror has been clearly shown to others. In any case, I must thank you for bringing the insight ring, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to see Loki in the mirror without relying on the ring to make a monitor. Nick Fury thanked Thor. Little things, after all. Asgard also cares about my brother's life and death. Thor said indifferently. After watching the surveillance footage, everyone withdrew their gaze from the monitor and came to the side of the conference table. After sitting down, Steve spoke, it's certain that Loki will definitely find a chance to take the Rubik's Cube, but we are well prepared, and it will be easy to deal with him. That's natural, we already have a whole set of countermeasures. A smile appeared on Stark's face, and then he pondered for a moment, and then said, I reckon that Loki has controlled Professor Jane, most likely let him teleport himself to Earth, and then find a way to teleport the Zeteri with a better device. Quote. Tony is right, we'll wait until he comes and grab him. Nick Fury concluded. Then everyone fell silent. It was only moments before Natasha showed a holographic projection to everyone. On the projection, it is something similar to an aircraft carrier, only not in the sea, but flying in the sky. If you catch Loki, keep him here, I still have to go to Bruce Banner in the next 2 days, and I won't be involved in the Rubik's Cube. Natasha said. Yes, there you go. Nick Fury nodded in agreement. A month later. During this month, Loki did not do anything with the Rubik's Cube, and SHIELD's research on the Rubik's Cube continued steadily. Natasha also brought Bruce in. But during this period, everyone knew that the previous month was just the calm before the storm, so the more it came to this juncture, the more vigilant everyone became. Finally, 2 days later, an emergency struck. In the Institute, the cosmic cube suddenly burst out with a burst of energy and shot out a ray of light. And after the light disappeared, Loki's figure appeared in the Institute. Suddenly someone came out of the Rubik's Cube, and the rest of the researchers were dumbfounded on the spot and looked at Loki with a confused expression. Thank you for your research on the cosmic cube. Loki politely saluted the crowd, then raised his wand and fired a beam of light, reducing one of the guards to ashes on the spot. After the incident, the researchers fled in a panic, while the guards quickly drew their guns and fought back. But Loki is the god of Asgard after all, and his combat power is a top-level existence compared to mortals, so he easily solved this group of guards. It's over, Professor Jane, I need you to help me make a teleportation device. As he spoke, Loki stretched out his hand and directly picked up the cosmic cube in the memory. But before Professor Jane could speak, the door of the institute was suddenly kicked open, and Thor's figure appeared in Loki's sight. It's not just Thor, the ventilation duct from which Peter Parker climbs out. Outside the wall, Stark directly wears anti-Hulk armor and crashes through the wall into the institute. From the entrance in the other direction, Steve and Natasha, Hawkeye, plus Bruce came in. Wait, what is this situation? Loki was stunned. For so long, Loki had thought that his strategy was top secret and that no one except Thanos and the Zetarians would know about it. But if that's the case, why did these Avengers guys show up so quickly? I know you won't die in the void, you cunning fellow, see how I clean you up today. After saying this, Thor rushed straight up. His speed was extremely fast, and Loki knew it was too late to teleport with the Rubik's Cube, so he wanted to escape from the other direction. Thanks for watching.